You know, the oracle at Delphi once proclaimed me the wisest man in Athens. I spent years puzzling over this riddle, wandering through the agora, questioning politicians, poets, and craftsmen. Each claimed knowledge of their trade, their art, their governance. Yet when pressed, their certainty crumbled like dried clay. Eventually, I understood the oracle's meaning. I was wise only because I knew that I knew nothing. This paradox became the cornerstone of my life's work. People often remarked on my appearance. My bulging eyes, flat nose, and protruding belly made me look more like a satyr than a philosopher. I joked that my flat nose was actually an advantage, allowing my nostrils to catch scents from all directions. But perhaps my unusual looks served a purpose. They made me memorable, yes, but they also reminded people that wisdom doesn't come wrapped in beautiful packages. I wandered barefoot through Athens, wearing the same threadbare cloak in summer and winter, standing motionless for hours when deep in thought. Once, during our campaign at Potidaea, I stood contemplating from dawn to dawn while my fellow soldiers watched in amazement. Throughout my 70 years, I never wrote a single word. Not out of inability, I simply believed that wisdom couldn't be captured in dead letters on a page. Philosophy lived in dialogue, in the spark between questioning minds. Writing would freeze ideas like insects in amber, when they should flow like water, adapting to each soul they touched. My student Plato would later disagree, thankfully preserving our conversations for you to ponder centuries later. What guided me through these philosophical wanderings was something I called my daimonion, a divine voice that would warn me when I was about to err. It never told me what to do, only what not to do. This inner voice kept me from politics, from writing, from any path that would lead me away from my true calling, examining life itself. And this brings me to the question that consumed my every waking moment. The question I posed to every Athenian I met: how should one live? Not how to make money, win fame, or gain power, the usual concerns of my fellow citizens, but how to live a good and virtuous life. I believed, and still believe, that the unexamined life is not worth living. Every conversation, every question I asked in the marketplace, every irritating gadfly sting I delivered to the complacent, aimed at this single purpose, awakening souls to examine themselves, their beliefs, their very existence. This question, how should one live, would eventually cost me my life. But that's a story for another moment. I was born in 470 BCE, when Athens shone like a beacon across the Mediterranean. My father, Socrates, carved stone with hands as rough as the marble he shaped, while my mother, Phanerete, brought new life into the world as a midwife. Perhaps it was from her I learned to help others give birth to ideas. We lived modestly in the deme of Alapis, but what we lacked in wealth, Athens provided in spirit. Under Pericles, our city transformed before my eyes. The Parthenon rose from the Acropolis like a prayer in stone, and the air itself seemed charged with possibility. As a young man, I received the traditional education: music to harmonize the soul, gymnastics to strengthen the body, and literacy to sharpen the mind. But even then I hungered for something more than mere learning. When duty called, I served Athens as a hoplite, carrying shield and spear into battle at Potidaea, Amphipolis, and Delium. My fellow soldiers marveled at my endurance. I could march barefoot through winter snow without complaint, and once stood motionless in thought from dawn until dawn, wrestling with some philosophical problem while others slept. At Delium, when our lines broke, I retreated slowly, facing the enemy, helping save young Xenophon's life. These experiences taught me that physical courage pales beside moral courage. The intellectual ferment of Athens intoxicated me more than any wine. I studied under Archelaus, who himself had learned from the great Anaxagoras. These natural philosophers sought to explain the cosmos through reason rather than myth. Yet the more I learned about the movements of celestial bodies and the nature of matter, The more I realized these investigations, while fascinating, missed something essential. What good was knowing the composition of the stars if we didn't know how to live? The turning point came when my friend Chaerephon, impetuous as always, traveled to Delphi and asked the oracle if anyone was wiser than Socrates. The Pythia's response, that no one was wiser, baffled me completely. How could this be? I knew nothing of governance, poetry, or craftsmanship beyond my father's trade. This divine riddle consumed me. I began my investigation in the Agora, that bustling heart of Athens, where merchants hawked their wares and citizens debated the issues of the day. I questioned everyone: the pompous politician who claimed to understand justice but couldn't define it, the celebrated poet who created beautiful verses but couldn't explain their meaning, the skilled craftsman who knew his trade perfectly but thought this made him wise in all things. Day after day, I wandered among the stalls and colonnades, engaging anyone who would speak with me. My appearance became as familiar as the statues of the gods, barefoot even in winter, wearing the same threadbare cloak, my snub nose and bulging eyes making me look more like a satyr than a philosopher. Some found my questions annoying, like the persistent buzz of a gadfly. Others, particularly the young men of Athens, gathered around me, fascinated by this new way of examining life. Through these countless conversations, the oracle's meaning slowly dawned on me. Each person I questioned revealed the same pattern. They thought they knew far more than they actually did. Their supposed wisdom was a facade, crumbling under examination. I, at least, harbored no such illusions. I knew that I knew nothing, and this recognition of ignorance was itself a kind of wisdom. This revelation changed everything. I abandoned my stonework, much to my wife Xanthippa's frustration, and devoted myself entirely to this strange calling, helping others examine their lives, their beliefs, their assumptions. For as I would later say at my trial, the unexamined life is not worth living. Let me tell you about the method that defined my life, the very approach that led to both my fame and my death. You see, I developed a peculiar way of engaging with others, a form of questioning that my students later called the elenchus. Like my mother, the midwife, I helped people give birth to their own understanding, though the labor was often painful. Picture me in the agora, approaching a general who claimed to understand courage. "Tell me, Larcus," I would begin, "what is this courage you possess so admirably?" He might reply that courage meant standing firm in battle. "Ah," I would continue, "but what of the tactical retreat that saves an army? Is that not also courageous?" Step by step, question by question, I would reveal the contradictions in his thinking until his initial certainty dissolved into puzzlement. This wasn't mere intellectual game-playing. I genuinely believed, and still believe, that the unexamined life is not worth living. These words I spoke at my trial weren't dramatic flourish, but the deepest truth I knew: to live without questioning, without seeking understanding of virtue, justice, and the good, that was to live as a beast rather than a human being. My approach stemmed from a profound realization. I knew that I knew nothing. This wasn't false modesty or clever wordplay. When I examined my own beliefs with the same rigor I applied to others, I found them equally wanting. The oracle's pronouncement made sense only when I understood that my wisdom lay in recognizing my ignorance, while others remained blind to theirs. But why did this matter so deeply? Because I had discovered something revolutionary. Virtue is knowledge. If someone truly understands what justice is, they cannot act unjustly. It would be like someone who knows fire burns deliberately placing their hand in flames. When people act wrongly, it's because they're ignorant of the good. The tyrant who oppresses others doesn't truly understand that justice brings happiness, while injustice brings misery to the soul. This conviction drove me to seek definitions with an almost obsessive fervor. What is justice? I would ask Polemarchus. What is piety? I questioned Euthyphro. What is courage? I pressed Lacus and Nicias, not because I enjoyed watching them struggle, though I admit there was satisfaction in puncturing pomposity, but because without clear understanding of these virtues, how could we live them? My students often grew frustrated. But Socrates, they would protest, you tear down every definition we offer, yet provide none of your own. True enough. But consider, isn't it better to know you're lost than to confidently stride down the wrong path? My questioning cleared away the false knowledge that prevented genuine understanding. I cared nothing for natural philosophy. Let others debate whether everything is water or fire or atoms swirling in the void. My concern was the soul. While my fellow Athenians pursued wealth, reputation, and power, I wandered barefoot through the city, engaging anyone who would listen in conversations about how to live well. The body needs only simple food and basic shelter, but the soul requires wisdom and virtue to flourish. This made me unpopular with many. I became known as the gadfly of Athens, constantly buzzing around the city, stinging the lazy beast of complacency into wakefulness. A gadfly seems merely annoying, but without it, the noble horse grows sluggish and useless. Athens needed someone to challenge its assumptions, to prevent it from sleeping through life in comfortable ignorance. Young men flocked to watch me question their elders, delighting when pompous politicians and self-proclaimed experts were reduced to stammering confusion. They began imitating my method, questioning authority throughout the city. Their fathers blamed me for corrupting them, not understanding that I was teaching them to think, not what to think. My method was simple yet profound. Through careful questioning, I would help people see that their beliefs contained contradictions. A man might claim piety meant prosecuting wrongdoers, even his own father. But, I would ask, don't the gods themselves disagree about justice? How then can we define piety by what pleases them? Layer by layer, we would peel back assumptions until we reached the core puzzlement. Some called this destructive, but I saw it as purification. Just as a doctor must clean a wound before it can heal, the soul must be cleansed of false beliefs before it can receive truth. My questioning was therapeutic, not destructive, though I admit the treatment often stung. The pursuit of wisdom became my divine mission. The god at Delphi had set me on this path, and my inner voice, my daimonion, kept me true to it. When it warned me away from politics or certain actions, I listened. This voice never told me what to do, only what not to do. Another form of knowing through not knowing. Through decades of questioning, I developed unshakable convictions that wisdom begins with humility, that virtue can be taught because it is knowledge, that caring for the soul matters more than all worldly success, and that a life spent examining oneself and others is the only life truly worth living. These beliefs would cost me dearly, but that's a reflection for another time. When they brought me to trial in 399 BCE, I stood before 500 of my fellow Athenians, accused of corrupting the youth and impiety toward the gods. Meletus, that young poet with more ambition than wisdom, led the prosecution. But I saw this not as a tragedy, rather as the ultimate test of everything I had taught. In my defense, which Plato later called the Apology, I explained why I had spent my life questioning others. The oracle at Delphi had declared me the wisest man in Athens. This puzzled me deeply, for I knew that I knew nothing. Through years of inquiry, I discovered the oracle's meaning. While others claimed knowledge they didn't possess, I at least recognized my ignorance. This, paradoxically, made me wiser. The jury offered me alternatives: exile, silence, a fine. But how could I accept? For as I told them the unexamined life would be to cease living, they couldn't understand why I chose death over abandoning my mission. Let me explain what they couldn't grasp. You see, I had discovered something profound. Virtue is knowledge. No one does wrong willingly. They do wrong only through ignorance of what is truly good. If people genuinely understood what would bring them happiness, they would pursue virtue naturally. This wasn't mere theory. It was the foundation of human naturally. Itself, my critics, especially the sophists like Protagoras and Gorgias, preached that truth was relative, that man is the measure of all things. They sold their teachings for silver, claiming they could make the weaker argument appear stronger. But I saw through their clever words. If truth is merely what each person believes, then justice becomes meaningless, virtue becomes arbitrary, and we descend into moral chaos. Consider Euthyphro, whom I met at the courthouse. He claimed to know piety so well that he was prosecuting his own father. Yet when I asked him whether acts are pious because the gods love them, or whether the gods love them because they are pious, he couldn't answer. His certainty crumbled under examination. This is why I opposed the sophists, not from stubbornness, but because moral truth exists independently of our opinions about it. The relationship between virtue and happiness isn't accidental, it's necessary. The tyrant who gains power through injustice lives in constant fear. The wealthy man who hoards gold finds no peace. But the just person, even in poverty or chains, possesses an inner harmony that no external force can disturb. This isn't naive optimism. It's the deepest truth about human nature. When I drank the hemlock, my friends wept, but I consoled them. Death, I explained, is either a dreamless sleep or a journey to another place where I could question Homer and Hesiod for eternity. Either prospect delighted me. The soul, I had come to believe, is immortal, not because tradition said so, but because the soul's very nature is to seek truth, and truth itself is eternal. My choice wasn't between life and death, but between integrity and betrayal of everything I stood for. Popular opinion condemned me, but popular opinion had also once believed the earth was flat. The crowd's judgment matters little when weighed against moral truth. They called me Athens' gadfly, sent by the gods to sting the lazy horse of our city into action. Perhaps they were right to fear me, not because I corrupted the youth, but because I taught them to think. And thinking, genuine thinking, is always dangerous to those who rule through deception. This was my legacy, not answers, but better questions. Not certainty, but honest uncertainty. Strange, isn't it, how ideas can outlive the flesh that birthed them? When I drank that hemlock in 399 BCE, I thought my work might die with me. But my devoted Plato, that aristocratic youth with fire in his eyes, he preserved my words, my questions, even my mannerisms in his dialogues. Xenophon, too, though he painted me more practical than I ever was. What began as simple conversations in the agora has somehow shaped 24 centuries of thought. They tell me every philosopher since has had to wrestle with my ghost. Through Plato's academy, then through his student Aristotle, my method of questioning spread like ripples in a pond. The Stoics took my self-discipline, the skeptics my doubt, the cynics my disdain for wealth. Most amusing is how my Elenchus lives on in your law schools and classrooms. Students still learn by questioning, by discovering their own ignorance before finding no ignorance before finding knowledge. Socratic Method, they call it, as if I invented something grand. I merely asked questions. But perhaps what moves me most is how my death transformed me into something I never claimed to be, a symbol of intellectual courage. When thinkers face persecution, when teachers challenge authority, when anyone chooses truth over comfort, they invoke my name. Even some Christians saw me as their predecessor, martyred for refusing to betray my principles. You know what truly matters, not that they remember Socrates, but that they remember to question. Every time someone stops to ask, what do I really know? Or how should I live? There my work continues. The unexamined life remains not worth living, whether in ancient Athens or your modern world. My body returned to dust, but the questions, the questions endure. As I faced that final cup of hemlock, I felt no fear, only curiosity about what questions awaited beyond. My friends wept, But I reminded them an unexamined life isn't worth living, and neither is an unexamined death. Now I leave you with this invitation: question everything, especially your deepest beliefs. In your age of endless information, the Socratic method matters more than ever. Whether you're challenging misinformation, examining ethical dilemmas in technology, or simply trying to understand yourself better, remember, wisdom begins with admitting ignorance. The journey of philosophy isn't found in dusty books, but in daily practice. Question authority, question tradition, question even these words. Make your life a continuous dialogue with truth. I spent 70 years learning. I knew nothing. Perhaps you'll discover the same beautiful ignorance, and in that discovery, find the freedom I found to live authentically, die peacefully, and never stop asking,